Pastor Coleman.
Good evening, everyone. Well, welcome to this wonderful time that we're going to have together with women of colors. We get excited about what's going to happen. Let's begin our conversation tonight with a word of prayer. If you'll bow your heads with me and just open your hearts for a moment. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee, how great thou art, how great thou art. Our Father and our God, we look to you now because we've come to a time of open conversation about issues that are affecting so many people. We're praying that tonight would be a ministry of hope and help, that hearts would be open to be touched by ways of coping with circumstances, that we'll be educated to the reality of the pressures of our time and how the pressures and the weight of this season of pandemic that we've been in has laid another layer of stress upon people that they're trying to cope with. And at every level, they're trying to cope. So tonight, we pray that words would be spoken that would be healing, that lights would come on and people could see that there is a way out, there is help, and that the testimonies of victory will be encouraging. So we ask you to bless this effort, bless these who will take part, and we give your name praise forever. Amen.
Amen. Welcome to Women of Colors Forum. Tonight's title is Suicide Awareness / Mental Health Awareness. I'm Vicki Hill and I'm your host tonight. And I'm going to go around and I'm going to introduce everyone that's on the panel so that you know who everyone is. Even though you see their names, I want you to know who they are especially. I'm going to start it out with the president of Women of Colors, which is Evelyn McGovern. Hello, Evelyn.
Hello, everyone.
All right, next I've got Lula Woodard. She's a longtime member of Women of Colors. Hello, Lula.
Good evening.
Thank you. And then I'm going to go, you've already heard from Pastor Coleman. Pastor Coleman is the pastor of the World Outreach Campus right here in the city of Saginaw. Hello, Pastor. And then I will move on to Dr. Georgia Connick, who is a licensed psychologist here in Saginaw. Hi, Georgia. From there, I'm going to go to Judge Terry Clark. Hello, Your Honor.
Hey, good evening to the Great Lakes Bay.
I also have on this panel Matisa Berry Ellison, a survivor of suicide loss. Hi, Matisa. Then I have Kevin Fisher, who is the executive director of NAMI. Hello, Kevin.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm wonderful. And last but not least, I have Barb Smith, who is the executive director of Suicide Resource Network. Hi, Barb.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you all for joining me tonight in this wonderful conversation, a conversation that needs to happen. Before we get started in our conversation, I'm going to call on Lula Woodard, who is going to give you just a brief history of Women of Colors.
So again, good evening. Women of Colors is an independent nonprofit organization that has been an active community partner since its inception in 1993. One of our missions for Women of Colors is to promote multicultural diversity and enhance community relations in the Great Lakes Bay region by empowering families, performing community service, mentoring youth, and collaborating with other organizations. Women of Colors, as we've learned how to pivot virtually during the pandemic since last year. Women of Colors has continued to advocate leadership, collaboration, diversity, equity, inclusion in programs and our forums that we are having through countless hours to enrich the culture of volunteerism and services that make the Saginaw community awesome. It's a great place for individuals and families to work, have fun, and live. WALK is grateful to everyone who has contributed and partnered with us through our 28 years of our footprints of labor in the community involvement. We are always looking for volunteers and new members joining our meeting monthly on the first Thursday of every month, 6:30. You may contact us at womenofcolors.org. Our president, Evelyn McGovern, who is on the feed. And you may also reach us at 989-737-2986, as well as catch us on Facebook Live at Women of Colors.
Thank you so much, Lula. Now, I introduced everyone, so I don't know if I introduced myself or not, but I am Vicki Hill. I am your host tonight. I am radio personality for KISS 107.1, also vice chair of Women of Colors. Tonight, as I stated, we're talking about suicide awareness / mental health awareness. Now, realizing that this month, the month of May, is mental health awareness month. So we definitely want to talk about that. And when I thought about this particular subject, it's really hard to do one without the other. To me, they're kind of married together in some sort of way. So we're going to talk about mental health first. Now, when I think about mental health and I think about, we'll start even, I'm going to say before 2019, because this just didn't start when the pandemic took place, because it was going on before the pandemic took place. But after the pandemic took place, things took a little bit more of an urgent turn, I should say. Things got just maybe a little bit worse for a lot of people. And the reason I say that is because once that pandemic came and we were shut down and we were put in our homes and really couldn't go anywhere, it took a toll on a lot of people's mental health. And for that, I just want to kind of touch bases on that a little bit. So I'm going to talk to you, Kevin. Now, tell me about mental health. And I know that you are the professional in this area. So tell me about what you feel that a mental health state took place when the pandemic hit versus before the pandemic. Do you feel that it's a little bit stronger when the pandemic took place?
Yes. There's a difference between mental illness and mental health. We all have mental health, just as we have the rest of our physical health. And we need to understand that mental health is mental illness is a medical diagnosis. As you said, Vicki, you can't separate your brain from the rest of your body. And so we need to focus on our mental health. And that can be mindfulness. That is really taking time for self-care. When you know that you've reached your limit, when you're overstressed, that's a part of your mental health. With the pandemic, a lot of people who have not been diagnosed with mental illness, AKA depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, those formal diagnoses, started to feel the pressures of life, social isolation. The kids are at home 24/7 now. Mom and dad are trying to homeschool and work from home. We're out of work. We're not able to socialize with our friends and family. We're not able to hug and touch. That all had an effect, a negative effect on our mental health. And people, for lack of a better term, started to feel the walls close in a little. This is where the situation became more exacerbated nationally. And we started to see increases in substance use disorder. We started seeing increases in depression and anxiety. We started to see increases in trauma-related issues, domestic violence, those kinds of things. That all affects our mental health. And so while those are unfortunately terrible things, one of the positive side effects is there is now this national focus on addressing our mental health and making sure people understand what resources are available to them and how to take care or better care of their mental health.
Okay, and as I was speaking to, actually, when I started thinking about this topic and putting the word out that Women of Colors was going to be doing this particular topic, I started getting calls and texts and emails from all sorts of people because they are so grateful that we're bringing this awareness to people who are not necessarily talking about it. Is that the better word to say it? Because as you said, once the pandemic took place and we were stuck in our homes, then we need to do some self-care to keep our minds active in a positive way. But there were so many people that were put in situation, I should say, in a situation already in their homes that was already bad. And imagine yourself being already in a situation and no way to get out of that situation and having to deal with it. It takes a toll on your mental state. Now, I even thought about it once we shut down everything, the country was shut down. You barely, all you could do was go to work. Those who could go back in the building, I never stopped working. I was always there. So going to work and coming straight home. And the only other place you could go was maybe to the grocery store and pick up a few items of food. So I found myself, in order to take care of mental health, is I found myself working in my yard all the time. I was out there all the time. Never watered so many flowers in my entire life, but I was out there. But it gave me something to do. It gave me something more to focus on besides I can't go anywhere. I can't see my loved ones. I can't touch anybody. And I can imagine other people were feeling the same way. I began to talk with some people just this week who were talking about mental health. And as I said, they're grateful that we have a platform, that we are using this platform to make people aware that there is help out there if you're going through mental illness and mental crises. And they were saying to me, the negative stigma that's out there. Sometimes people think, I guess mental illness shows up in a bunch of different forms. Am I right? So, Georgia, tell me some of the forms that you've seen when it comes to mental illness. Now, Georgia is a licensed psychologist, and I know she has a lot of patients that she speaks with all the time. So, give me your point of view on that.
Vicki, I think, and I'm glad to be here on this panel. I think it was a wonderful idea and project for you to pull together. I think one of the major impacts of the virus, that whole situation, was the impact on folks who are not normally considered mentally ill. People who know they have a mental illness usually have some way of dealing with it. They have a therapist, or they have medication, they have rituals that they involve themselves in. And so they could adapt to the situation better than people who did not consider themselves mentally ill. I think anger was one of the first emotions that came out because everybody's life was interrupted. Maybe they were laid off from their jobs, or were had to work from home, had to make that adjustment, had to just shift everything. And many people were just really angry and did not know how to express that anger, or to deal with it. Paranoia was one of the major fallouts that I saw. People were just afraid. They were so afraid that they were going to get the virus. They were afraid of other people having the virus. They were afraid of had to wear the mask. Some people were just really got into the mask and wanted to wear them, but they encountered other people who didn't want to wear them and who refused to wear them. I think you recall the situation in a store in Saginaw where people actually fought and someone was killed over wearing the mask, where some people came in and said, why don't you have your mask on? And it actually exacerbated into a situation where a person was killed. That kind of paranoia can just, people find themselves just being so afraid, so fearful. And many of these people have never had to deal with mental illness before. So I think that fear of the unknown, not knowing what's going to happen, who's going to get sick when your kids go out, if they're going to be infected by somebody, or what's going to happen with the schools. Kids are getting behind. Many people had to quit their jobs because they had no one to take care of their children. Then they were worried about how they were going to pay their bills, how they were going to make it. So it was just really a stressful time for people, even that who are not mentally ill. But I think now they may be coming to terms with the fact that stress does cause sometimes inability to cope. And that inability to cope is enough to, I think, get you into someone's office to talk about this, to work out to a pattern, a plan that allows you to cope with what's going on and last through it. That quality that we call resilience is what we try to help develop in individuals so that they understand that they can get through this. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with everything you said. Now, Kevin, when a person is having a mental breakdown, a mental crisis, if you will, are there warning signs? Sometimes there are, sometimes they aren't. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. There are warning signs, for example, changes in behavior and pattern, excessive worry or fear suddenly, um, feeling excessively sad or low, confused thinking, change in appetite, um, changes in or engaging in more risky behavior, whether it's substance use disorder, more risky driving, changes in hygiene, changes in or disassociating with things that previously brought you joy. For example, if you love music or dance or prayer and you started to disassociate with those things, those are some relatively common symptoms to watch for.
And as I was speaking with someone this week, all of those things that you talked about, yes, those things are definitely signs of it. But as I was talking to this person, I know that there's therapy out there for anybody who might be going through some type of a mental breakdown, a mental crisis, if you will. And then there's medication for those people. What happens when the person is going to see their counselor or their doctor, their therapist, if you will, and they're on the medications, but the medications are really not they don't seem to work. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, first of all, we need to work very closely with our providers. And so, using the example you just gave, if you're on medication, and this can be medication for mental health conditions or any other condition that you have. I have a 90-year-old mother, and I tell her all the time, if the medication is not working, then you have to talk to your doctor and tell them what's going on. One of the common mistakes that we make is we don't take our medication as prescribed. We start splitting pills, we take too much or too little. And one of the things we need to understand is the doctors can't make the necessary adjustments if we're not honest with them and let them know what the problem is. Sometimes we're actually causing side effects by not taking the medication as prescribed. If you're supposed to take medication 3 times a day, there's a reason that it was prescribed for you to take 3 times a day. If you start taking it only once, and when you go to the doctor and you complain, my medication isn't working, the first thing they say, are you taking it as prescribed? And unfortunately, most of us say yes when we know we're not. Doctor can't make the proper adjustment if they don't know what's going on. And the same thing happens with your provider. If you're going to counseling or if you're seeing a psychotherapist, you have to be open and honest and tell them what's going on in your life for them to be able to address it. If you hold back, if you don't give them all of the information, then bad things can happen, or at the very least, you don't get the desired outcome.
Mhm.
Okay. And the person I was speaking to mentioned something to me, and I had never heard of it before. She told me about it's called gene testing therapy. Now,
Mhm.
according to her doctor, this gene testing therapy is what they use to rule out the medications that don't seem to work. Have either you or Georgia heard of that?
Oh, sure. And it's something that's been around for a few years. I'm a believer. We use that process at Odyssey, where I've worked for many years. And it really is designed to determine the tolerances in your system to certain medications and what medications actually make a difference, will actually help. It's not perfect. So many people don't want to do it because they see it as kind of a trial and error type thing, and that doctors are just using them as guinea pigs or whatever. But actually, you come up with a medication regime that fits you, that is really designed for you. Some people tend to compare what they take with what somebody else takes, which is not a good idea. What worked for you may not work for somebody else. So the gene typing is a very good way to really determine if you need medication and what medication is going to work.
Okay.
And if I could add, Vicki, there is a company, I know at least of one that's here in Michigan. I believe it's in Kalamazoo, that provides this type of service. And I wanted to kind of comment on what Dr. Georgia just explained. You know, in the United States, it takes on average 8 to 10 years for a person from the time the onset of mental health symptoms until they get proper services. Part of that delay is trying to identify the correct, we call it cocktail of medications that work best for you. It's not as if the doctors are experimenting on you, which some, as Dr. Georgia said, some people take it as. It is because it's not an exact science. All of our body chemistry is different. I can be diagnosed with the same diagnosis that you have, but be on a totally different medication or cocktail of medications because my body chemistry is different. And going back to my previous comments, one of the frustrations in this process is being honest with the doctor, taking the medication as prescribed, and then reporting back to the doctor if you're having side effects, if it's making me feel lethargic, if I'm gaining weight, if all of these other things are going on. We have to be honest with the doctors and go back in 2 weeks or 30 days and say, hey, doc, this is how I feel, so they can make the necessary adjustments. Many people do get frustrated with that process, and they end up dropping out of their treatment. They end up dropping out of taking their medication and say, I'll do it on my own, or I will self-medicate with alcohol and drugs, which is not the direction we need to go in. We need to be honest with our provider and say, this is what's happening, so we can make the proper adjustments. And this gene typing is a great way to cut that time down, because as Dr. Georgia mentioned, it's not an exact science, but it does a much better job of identifying these are the medications that might work best for you, so we can cut out some of that trial and error.
Yeah.
Okay. So what would you say to a person who, like I said, I got a lot of calls and texts and emails, and what would you say to a person who is afraid to let another person or someone know that they have a mental illness or are in a mental crisis. They're afraid of their being stereotyped. They say people think that they're just strung out on drugs. When they're feeling anxious and they can't sit still, people are just assuming the worst instead of actually finding out about the person. They are also afraid that if they are on a job, that HR or the CEO or their management, their direct manager finds out about this, they're afraid that they're going to lose their job if they tell them. So therefore, they don't completely tell what's going on with them. And when they break down and have a crisis, they don't know what to do.
So we call that stigma, very simply. And that, Vicki, is the leading barrier that prevents people from getting the early diagnosis and treatment that leads to the best outcomes. That
Absolutely.
I tell people, stigma kills. I mean, at the end of the day, stigma can kill. And we can have the conversation about my experience with my son. But if you are not ashamed to have high blood pressure, if you're not ashamed to have cancer, if you're not ashamed to be diabetic, you should be no more ashamed to be living with a mental illness diagnosis than any other, because a mental illness is a medical diagnosis. It is not a weakness of character. And we have to fundamentally change the way we look at mental illness in this country, because it is quite literally killing us. And this conversation tonight and all that we're talking about, this is suicide prevention. This is like when we proactively address our mental health. And if we're diagnosed with a mental illness, and if we show compassion and encourage people to seek the help that they need, this is life-saving work. This is the very definition of suicide prevention, this conversation tonight. So I absolutely appreciate you and women of color making this platform available, because this will save somebody's life, whether we ever hear about it directly or not. This will save somebody's life.
Absolutely. It's kind of hard to talk one with the other, because it's like putting the cake together. You need the egg and the cake. So it's one is connected, and definitely stimulus that you were talking about. You know, they used to say a long time ago when people were going through a crisis or might have some type of a breakdown, they would put this stigma on. They're just crazy. People don't want to hear you say, I'm crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm having a crisis. And so I like the fact that there are resources for people to go and get the help that they need. And like you said, they can't be made to take the medicine. But I personally know some people who are on medications, but the medications don't always seem to work. And they have to keep leveling them up on a different medication to try to find what's working. And I've seen people go through their highs and go through their lows. It's hard to really understand what to give that person. That's why education is so important. It's so important for us to have the different resources and to be able to lead that person, or at least tell that person where to go. Do you?
Oh, Vicki, I think we lost your audio.
Oh, you don't hear me?
Yeah, you're back now. Okay.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, I said a whole lot. All right. So what I'm saying is education is good. It is the key. It is the key to helping a person who might need that help. Having that information that we can give to that person so that they can get the resources that they need, so that they can call a hotline when they're going through that mental crisis. Is there such a thing as a mental hotline?
There is, and well, there are many resources available like that. It just kind of depends on where you are. Sometimes it is determined by your location. There's the National Suicide Prevention Hotline that you have streaming There's NAMI. NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization. We field hundreds of thousands of calls each year at our national office in Virginia, at our state offices here in Michigan, and then there are local NAMI affiliates that also field calls. There's text to talk lines 741-741 that's available. There are many resources. Part of the problem, frankly, is there are so many resources that can be a little confusing. I believe it's next year the new national 3-digit number 988 will go live. It will replace the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number that we're streaming right now, because when you're in a crisis, we don't want you to have to remember a whole 800 number. We want you to be able to call 911 or, in this case, 988. Real briefly, I do want to say that one of the problems we have with mental health crisis or behavioral health crisis, because again, as you mentioned, you really can't separate. You can't separate mental illness from substance use disorder, from suicide prevention, from intellectual and developmental disabilities, from autism. All of that's connected to your brain. So all of that works together. Part of the problem we have in this country, and I say this respectfully, is because of the stigma associated with behavioral health care disorders. We are really an ignorant society when it comes to what resources are available, what treatment really looks like, because we still have this antiquated image in our head of mental health treatment back in the 50s and 60s, where we were institutionalizing people and they were performing experiments on them and all of those kinds of things. Behavioral health care has evolved, as all medicine has, and most people, when they receive the early diagnosis and treatment that I talked about earlier, they tend to go on to live very productive, very normal lives. A mental illness diagnosis is not and should not be a death sentence. Now, just like with any other physical diagnoses, I can be diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and I can be diagnosed at stage 1. If I'm diagnosed at stage 1, my odds of recovery are much improved than if I ignore it until it's stage 4. That's what we tend to do in this country when we talk about mental illness. We ignore it until it reaches crisis. Literally, we tend to ignore it until the person becomes a danger to themselves or others. Then we run into situations where we're calling the police to respond. And sometimes, and this may be a different conversation, but we've seen nationally where the police are called, they're not properly trained, people end up hurt or dead. Part of that we can put on the police, but part of that we have to accept responsibility for ourselves. If my wife knows that I have a mental illness and that I'm not taking my medication and I'm not participating in therapy, if she chooses to ignore that until I scare her, until I present to her as a danger to myself or to her or others, shame on her, shame on me, shame on us for waiting until it reached crisis. We should be getting Kevin help when he's at stage 1, not stage 4. And the other thing I want to add in is there are trainings, there's lots of education and support that's available. And my good friend Barb Smith, she is one of, quite frankly, a fantastic trainer. The training that she provides helps people identify people who are in crisis and get them the help they need before they are suicidal.
Absolutely. And you know what? That was a good point, that we need to get people help before they reach, as you would say, stage 4 cancer. Now, what would you say to education is definitely key to everybody learning something about mental illness. Now, you mentioned about the police, and we've seen on TV. I watch the news every single day. That's my daily thing. I get up in the morning when I'm getting dressed. I sit down and I'm watching Good Morning America with my cup of coffee, right? So I've seen numerous times where the police actually has taken someone's life because they didn't know that this person was going through a mental crisis at the time. Because if you look at it with the naked eye, it looks like something else. That person is real aggressive. that person's not listening, that person might be lunging after you. Not that the person is strung out on drugs, but the person is going through a mental crisis. And so, wouldn't you say, and I know you just said it, that everybody needs to be educated on mental illness? I think we'd have a better outcome of so many different things if everybody could get that education.
Absolutely. And if we want to focus on law enforcement for just a moment, um, I
Sure.
happen to I happen to sit on the board of directors for an organization called Crisis Intervention Team International, and that is a program that NAMI helped develop back in 1989
Looks
with
like
the
something else.
univer-
That person is real aggressive.
I'm getting some feedback. I'm sorry. Um,
Go ahead, Kevin.
but we developed it with the Memphis Police Department and the University of Memphis after two unarmed men were shot and killed by Memphis police who were in mental health crisis, but the police didn't know how to respond. And there's so many layers to this, Vicki. But one of the points that I like to make is it's not always so much that law enforcement officers don't recognize that a person is in behavioral health crisis, whether they're on drugs or they're in the middle of a psychotic episode. It's that they don't always know how to respond and how to deal with that. And most law enforcement officers are trained to escalate, not to de escalate. That is how they gain control of situations because a rational person, a person that is not in the midst of a behavioral health crisis, would naturally fear or respect the badge and the gun. The problem for most law enforcement officers who don't go through crisis intervention training is they don't know, one, how to recognize, two, how to de-escalate that situation. Law enforcement officers, when we see these terrible stories, these tragedies on the news, often you hear the officer say, the person failed to follow my commands. That's one of the statements that absolutely gets under my skin because it wasn't necessary that the person was being defiant and choosing not to follow your commands. That person wasn't able to follow your
Able
commands.
to know.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
when you're in the midst of a mental health crisis, or even the governor just signed about 6 months ago an autism bill. A person who is on the autism spectrum, they process information differently. And I'll give you a really quick example. When law enforcement pulls you over for a traffic stop, they walk up, tap your window with their flashlight, give me your license, registration, proof of insurance, put your hands on the wheel so I can see them. You've just given me four commands. A person on the autism spectrum can't do all four of those things at one time. A person who is in the midst of a behavioral health crisis may not be able to respond. So the officer says, well, you're not following my command. So they escalate because they take it as you being defiant. No, I'm not capable right now. And so sometimes when we go through this training, and it's a very intensive training, we role play with officers and we try to make it as real as possible. As a matter of fact, we make it so real that we take their weapons when they come in the room and put them in a lockbox and say, no, we don't want anybody to get hurt. But we run through these scenarios for like 2.5 days. And we go through these things to help them understand, well, what's the big deal? If Kevin is pacing, for example, if I'm in the midst of a mental health crisis and I'm pacing, I'm not fighting, I'm not fleeing, I'm just pacing because pacing is my maybe my coping mechanism, and I'm trying to de-escalate myself. Well, the officer says, well, I want you to stop and talk to me. Well, I'm not able to. What's wrong with allowing me to pace? I'm not fleeing and I'm not fighting. So law enforcement officers, part of this training is to say, well, what's the big deal? Is your command so important that you escalate to the point that you harm somebody or kill them when I wasn't fleeing and I wasn't fighting? I'm pacing. Pace with me. You get paid by the hour, you're not going anywhere. So I mean, some of these things we really have to go through, and we have to do that at home. My experience with my son was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, and I knew nothing about this 13 years ago. And there were times that he would do things that I didn't understand. He taught me so much. I mean, long before I got into this work officially, my son taught me so much, and he taught me to be patient because I learned that I had to meet him where he was. I couldn't fight with him and force him to come to where I thought he should be. If he wanted to do, he used to do this thing with his fingers and he would crack his knuckles. Well, you're not hurting me. Let him do his thing and talk to him instead of fighting with him where he would get so frustrated that he would leave. Or I could potentially, I never did, but I see this a lot. Parents put you out because they don't understand what you're going through. And that's why we need this education. This is why we need this education and support with organizations like NAMI and like with Barb, because we teach people that you're not alone, you're not the only one, and we have
Absolutely.
lived experience to share with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate that. And I'm going to just switch over just a little bit because, like I say, these situations kind of marry each other, right? So I'm going to just move just a little bit further and I'm going to talk with Matisa. Can you hear me, Matisa? Can you hear me, Matisa? There you go. Okay, so Matisa is a survivor of suicide loss. Matisa, I've heard your story. I talked to you about it. I want you to tell everybody that's listening your story.
Matisa, Matisa, cut your plug.
I don't hear you.
Is this better?
Yes, much better. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sorry about that. Um, First of all, I would like to say I'm honored to be a part of this panel that is helping create awareness on mental health and suicide prevention. And it's always a privilege to share my daughter, Brene's story. Brene was full of life, love, and caring. She enjoyed spending time with her family and friends. She had an awesome smile. She would just smile and she would light up the room. There was nothing she could not do. She was very passionate about basketball, volleyball, and shot put. She was state ranked for her shot put in track and field. Um, she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Um, Actually, I take that back. Let me step back. She was at age 17. She was diagnosed with severe depression. That's where it all started. She stopped hanging with her friends. She stopped going out. She stopped wanting to be with me. And then later on, she was diagnosed with the borderline personality disorder. BDP is what they call it. It is a mental disorder that impacted the way she felt and thought about herself and others. It also was. She also had like an attachment. She didn't want to be felt abandoned by people. Um, and as a parent, it started out with what's wrong with you? Like, do you know how good you have it? Like, it started out as a simple, do you understand where you're at in life? And we didn't understand as a family what she was going through initially. And as it progressed, we learned that it was more serious. It was something that we couldn't control. We had to learn about and move on with her. Um, but you would never tell by looking at her that she had a mental illness. You could never see that in her face unless you were in a hospital setting with her and when she went through her mania status.
When I talk to you and everybody that's looking and listening, Matisa lost her daughter. She died by suicide. And she's not alone on this panel because there has been others that are on this panel who also lost their loved one who died by suicide. I lost my 12-year-old nephew. I lost my 18-year-old niece. They both died by suicide, and it leaves it leaves it leaves questions in your mind. And the questions that are, I always say, when you bury your loved one, it doesn't stop there, because when they die by suicide, the parents, the friends, the rest of the family members that are left behind are wondering, what happened? What did I miss? Was there something I missed? Was there something else I could do that could help the person get through whatever they're going through? Were you guys, and I know, Kevin, I'll let you go ahead and tell your story, and then both of you can kind of join in on that. And even Barb, I know Barb lost her brother. He died by suicide. Am I right, Barb?
You are correct.
Okay. So if we could all kind of speak to that, that would be great. Kevin.
So in 2007, my oldest son, Dominique, who very much like Matissa describes her daughter, Dominique was an All American kid, three-sport athlete, great social skills, good student, gave his mom and I very little trouble growing up. Dominique was 20 years old and a sophomore at college when he came home for Thanksgiving break and was just rambling about taking over the world and talking to God, and God worked for him. And it's just something we'd never seen before. And we never really considered mental illness because we hadn't recognized any signs previously. So we took him to a hospital to be drug tested. We said, well, college kid, maybe he went off and experimented with drugs and had bad reaction. So after a lengthy exam at the hospital, the doctors informed us that he actually had no drugs or alcohol in his system and that they were putting him on a 72-hour psychiatric hold. And for my family, that was like running into a brick wall at 100 miles an hour. We just never considered mental illness. His initial diagnosis was schizophrenia. And for those who don't follow, schizophrenia are auditory or visual hallucinations. And Dominique's was auditory. So we recognized very quickly how ignorant we were to behavioral health care. We knew nothing about the resources available. We knew nothing about what his treatment plan was going to look like. We knew nothing about what his life was going to look like going forward. And so from that diagnosis in November of 2007 until 2010, we floundered in the behavioral health care system trying to understand continuity of care, trying to understand medications, trying to understand resources available, we left no stones unturned. Holistic approaches, you name it. Vicki, one of the things that I learned is the harder we fought, it seemed like the deeper we sank. And we would go through periods where he was doing very well and then not so well. And we would find out that he's not taking his medication as he's supposed to, and these kinds of things. So long story short, in early 2010, Dominique was doing so well that he convinced himself that I don't need the medication. I can do it on my own. He stopped going to therapy. And it was shortly after, I want to say March of 2010, when I discovered a small bag of marijuana in his pants pocket when I was doing his laundry. And I was very upset about it because I'm very anti-drug. And being an athlete, Dominique hadn't smoked and all of those things previously. And one of the things he told me was the marijuana makes the voices go away. And I was really angry, but when I went to his next doctor's appointment with his psychiatrist, the psychiatrist surprised me because she says, well, you're both sort of right. She said, the marijuana will make the voices go away, but the voices will return in greater frequency and greater intensity. And there will come a time where the marijuana will not be strong enough to chase the voices away, and he will graduate to stronger drugs. That is what we call co-occurring, because now he has a substance use problem, but he still has a serious mental illness to deal with. So Dominique, as an adult, because at this time he's 23, Dominique has to make a decision on if he wants to take his medication or if he wants to self-medicate. And Dominique decided to self-medicate, and Dominique decided to leave my home. And again, very long story short, on June 27th of 2010, while he was helping his mom pack and move, um, Dominique quietly dismissed himself from his mom's kitchen and went in the basement and hung himself. So the world stopped, for me. And one of the other interesting statistics about people who lose a loved one to suicide, and it's not just a parent losing a child, it can be a friend, a family member, anyone who has an association. You are 10 times more likely to die by suicide yourself as a result. And so, Vicki, when you talk about the questions left behind and the questions left unanswered, it next month will be 11 years for me. I'm still asking questions that I can't get, and I know I'm not going to get the answers to. But what I learned after losing Dominique, I didn't handle the grief very well. And I went to see a private counselor. I joined a national group for parents who lost children. In some ways, I tried to do everything that I thought was right to take care of myself. And I was sinking and sinking. And without conscious thought, I started planning my own suicide. I went to the lawyers and got my affairs in order to take care of my wife and children. I set aside things that were important to me, that I wanted my kids to have. And here's another myth buster. Most people who die by suicide do not want to die. Um, what we have found through what they call a forensic autopsy of thousands and thousands of cases of people who die by suicide, or people who have survived suicide attempts, is didn't want to die. I wanted to end the pain that I was living with. And that was me. I've never wanted to die, but I remember never praying and crying so much in my life. And I literally remember telling God, if you can't end this pain, I have to again tomorrow. So I I am grateful that I didn't go through with it. I am so grateful to God who saved me through my wife, which is a whole nother conversation we can have about toxic masculinity and faith, the intersection of faith and behavioral health. But I'm glad I'm here because I never wanted to die. I just didn't know how to manage the pain. And NAMI became, when we talk about coping mechanisms, NAMI became my therapy. This work that I do, though it is very difficult because I have to relive losing my son over and over again, it's very therapeutic for me because I'm able to get it out. So I'm going to say one last thing and then I'll be quiet. For those people who think that there's a stigma to receiving behavioral professional help, from seeing a Dr. Georgia, from seeing a counselor or social worker, let me tell you this: therapy saved my life. And it's not just because a Dr. Georgia was able to tell me how to, or able to fix me. It was me being able to get all of this off my chest. Men in particular, we are terrible at internalizing, and it is literally killing us in many ways beyond suicide. And going to see that therapist and just having the conversation and getting things off my chest literally saved my life. So I'm a living endorsement for therapy. So thank you.
Oh, that was great, Kevin. And I heard your story when I first talked to you, and we talked about this. And you know what? It does help to have some type of resource, some type of people or some person that you can go and talk with. So, Matisa, I know that when your daughter died by suicide, I believe you went and you talked to maybe several people. Tell me how you felt telling them. Now, I will tell you this. I know that some people who lose their loved ones, who lose their friends through suicide, especially the parents that I've found that I know personally, they feel ashamed. They feel ashamed to tell somebody that my child died by suicide. Why is that? Did you have those feelings at all, Matisa?
I don't think I had a feelings of shame because I had known since her age of 16 that she was struggling with mental illness when a parent called and said that a group of her friends that saw her Twitter messages, and she was speaking on suicide and the will not to live and things like that. So when I got that phone call, I was fully engaged with her, trying to seek help. And I did that for about 3 years. And so I never felt any shame or guilt, because when she went to the doctor, I went to the doctor. When she wanted to talk, I talked. Um, I had therapy. I had went 6 months without having therapy, dealing with it, but I ended up getting a counselor and talking and working through, because, like I said, my parents were more like, everything's okay. You know, everybody was like, everything is okay. Why are you going through this? She had never given us any problems. We thought it was a phase, but after 6 months, it's like, this is not a phase. This is not a phase. I need help, because I need to learn what's really going on with her. But never any shame, never any guilt for her. It
When
just
you
was
and I
there.
talked, when you and I talked, and I first called you, we talked about all of this. We also talked about um, our religions. We talked
Hmm.
about how it is not necessarily spoken in the Black community. We don't talk enough about this. We don't hear a lot of things about Black people talking about that our loved one has died by suicide, or our friend. It's just not spoken of. So
Right.
what do you have to say about that? I know when you and I talked the first time, we even talked about our churches. We talked about how it's really not brought up in our churches.
Right. Because we are taught as women to be strong. We're the head of the family, technically. Um, so to talk about it in church was uh, not hurtful, but like, you had this, the people would still say it's something that she will get through. We'll pray about it, but
Absolutely.
I've come to find out that you have to do the work. You can't just pray and expect God to drop down and give you something. You have to do the work. So my work was going with her to the doctors, making sure she was all right, visiting her when she went to the hospital. Um, I and I also was taught not to question God, and I found myself about a year after her passing that I was like, God, why? I did everything that a parent should do, absolutely should do. I was there, like, I supported her, and I don't know why this happened. And I got my answer. A certain peace came over me and said, this is not your story. This is her story. I want you to go tell it. I worked with her. I did what I need to do with her. But I want you to go tell her story to save another child. So that's where I'm at in this space. And as far as church, now that has happened, everybody's open, everyone's talking, we're having seminars, things like that. But initially, no one talked about it. No one talked about it in my church.
Absolutely. And I think it's great that we talk about it. We need to bring awareness to suicide, which marries with the mental health awareness. It just kind of marries together. So that's what our panel is all about. Today is we're just getting information out there, giving people some resources. Barbara, I'm going to bring you in right here because you have this wonderful organization. I heard about your organization. In fact, where I work on my day job, which is Joe Credit Union, I know that we supported you. So I went to my vice president, Bridget, and I asked her for your number. And I know when I text you that night on Facebook, you're like, who is this woman texting me? But you know what? And talking with you, I learned more about you to your website. I read all about your brother. I read about Brian's song, I believe is what it's called there. I read about all of that. So tell me about your brother and tell me about your network and the work that you are doing.
Well, my brother John was 20 years old when he took his life, quite some time ago when no one talked about suicide. So I took my life experience, and in our support group, we talk about, Suicide changes you, like that's a given. No matter who you are, when there's a death of suicide, it changes you, but it doesn't have to destroy you. So I took my life experiences and the way people respond to his death and to our family, also the stigma surrounding it. And I went out and got a lot of education and training around suicide prevention. So with that, recently, myself and Kevin are part of the Governor's Suicide Prevention Commission, and we started making changes statewide that we will start implementing some programs to help make changes for not only how we do prevention, but also how we care for people who are impacted by suicide. I am a trainer. Our network has a training team where we go out and we teach multiple trainings, one including the assist training through LivingWorks, their LivingWorks programs developed out of Canada. We sort of do trainings in layers because, as Kevin knows and Matisa, everyone can't be trained in the same program, right? We need multiple levels to build a safety net in our community. Just like CPR, that is a basic life-saving skill. When someone is having a heart attack, we need to respond quickly. We don't just leave the individual laying on the ground and wait for the paramedics to bring them into a heart surgeon, right? We have to quickly respond to that individual and to make sure that we get them to the next level. We want to keep them safe immediately. So there's multiple levels. One is called START. It's an online conversation training called START. It's really the start of the conversation. Anyone 14 years and older can do this online training. Myself and other trainers do some deliver training called Safe Talk. It's a half-a-day training to teach people how to recognize when someone's having a thought of suicide and to link them to someone who could do much more of the suicide intervention. Then there's an assist training that's 2 days, and that is to recognize someone who's having a thought, ask the question of suicide, hear their story, and then help them develop a safe plan, whether that's bringing them into psychiatry, the ER, having the police called, or oftentimes people just want to be heard, and everyone doesn't need to go to the ER. Everyone doesn't need a police call. Everyone does not need to go into inpatient psychiatric. Most people just need to be heard and understood and connected to someone who can help them and ease the pain that Kevin talked about. Most people don't want to die. They want their pain eased, right? They just need it to be eased just a little bit. So one of those trainings, we also do awareness trainings. But my frustration is with Kevin's is millions of people get trained in CPR, but you are 10 times more likely to come in contact with someone having thoughts of suicide than someone having a heart attack. But I'm very disappointed in our country. Honestly, like it's been a bad week. We're very disappointed that people are not showing up to the trainings. People are not spending time because they want everyone else to do it. They want primary care trained. They want better psychiatry, better ERs. But we as a community, as moms and dads and siblings and faith communities and neighbors and coworkers, we have better chance, a much better chance of helping save a life because we're the first contact. We're those first CPR people that can generally get them to safety. So my wish and my challenge is to people listening is to take the time to learn a life-saving skill. Be that safety net. Be that person that recognizes and that can connect with that individual to ease their pain. We can prevent 90 to 95% of suicides. That's a pretty big number. So why are we not taking trainings? This week, Vicki, is Suicide Prevention Training Week, and we have a proclamation from the governor. We actually have, I think there's 40 or 68 trainings. I think it's 68. 48 trainings going on just this week in Michigan. And they're all around these evidence-based trainings. Our training should all be full, and we should be having 100 trainings this week. But people don't want to take the time, and that saddens me that we think it's everybody else's issue. And I know Matisa talks often that she wishes she knew then what she knows now. We don't need to wait till it's too late. We need to educate ourselves, take this opportunity, and be part of the solution and not point fingers at who makes this happen and who failed. So my challenge is to anyone listening, help us help people who are hurting. Get involved and help make a difference.
Absolutely. Can you tell us about the training? What's the cost? Where's the training held? How can we get involved? Is there a website?
Sure. Our website is srrn.net, Suicide Resource Response Network. So srrn.net. And all of our trainings are posted on the website. If a church or a place of worship, community, workplace would like a training, we have some grant monies out there. The START trainings are actually free right now. They're generally $30. If you go to our website, you will see all the activities that we're doing. But also, if you want to open up your doors to a workplace, one of our trainers could come and also do trainings for you. So you have multiple levels that you can choose from.
That's really good. That's good. So you're telling everybody that there is training out there so that we can help our loved ones, our friends. They don't have to die. We can get that education that we need in order to help that person that might be going through those crises. I realize, and as talking to several people, sometimes I think that, and they kind of agreed with me, the person that's in that crisis at the moment is only thinking about it at the moment. They're trying to get away, as you said, they're trying to get out of the pain, and they don't know how to get away from that pain. Someone actually told me that it's like they're being chased by the pain, and they just don't know where to run and what to do. What would you say to a person who feels that way? What would you tell them to do?
I think there's 3 steps that we often teach people is when you're having these thoughts, have yours planned, just like if you're ever on fire. Vicki, what were we taught to do? If you're ever on fire, what do?
Drop and roll.
Stop, drop, and roll. The last time you were taught that was probably a long time ago, right?
Right.
2nd grade, but you go back into that response mode because the only thing your brain remembers to do around a crisis and a fire is to stop, drop, and roll. We never taught it to do anything else, so there's no confusion. So if someone's having thoughts or someone struggles, make sure that you have a 3-step plan, whatever it might be. Walk away from the method. Call your crisis, call that contact person or your support person, and then always have a 24-hour crisis line. But find the 3 things and make it easy steps that you can remember when that crisis starts to happen. For those people who are chronically suicidal, we're not going to tell you to never do it or don't think about it because we can't tell you not to think. But when you have those thoughts in that moment, just say to myself, I'm just not going to do it right now. Just don't right now, and start calling your crisis lines, your friends, or your support person. Because if we can get people through that crisis, Kevin can tell you, he's had that personal experience. If we can get people through that crisis, if you find someone to help ease your pain, most people do not go back in suicide because we give them help the first time.
Now, if a person calls the crisis hotline, if you will, they talk them through it. Is that what they do? Do they call the ambulance and send for them? And if the ambulance is sent for this person that's in this crisis, that is about to die by suicide, are they directly taken to a hospital? What takes place?
That's a great question because I think if people don't know what to expect, they're not going to make a call, right? Very few times are paramedics or law enforcement called when people call those numbers. That number oftentimes can get people to just sort of stop and think and come up with another plan to end their life. The numbers are very small, and I can't remember what it was, but it's very small for when the police are called, and it's usually after someone has done something already to start their suicide. They've already, implemented some of their plans. What's going to happen when you first call the 1-800-273-TALK is you will go to a local crisis line center, and we have 3 in the state of Michigan. Sometimes you have to wait a minute because they have to connect you to that number. But, you'll listen to a little bit of music, and that individual will just ask you, tell me why you're calling today. Let's talk about what's going on today. And they really just hear you and they give you some information, and then they will connect you to resources. They're going to give you some local numbers, some places that you can go to talk. The same thing with the text line. They're just going to talk to you. They're just going to get a sense of where your pain is and how they can help hear it to help minimize it. So those are two really important numbers. Very few times are the law enforcement called, because their idea is to let's keep you out of the air, right, as much as possible. There's another website, Vicki, that is called mantherapy.org. Mantherapy.org. It's a self-assessment for our men to go to, and it'll ask you a series of questions. And if you rate high on it, it'll guide you on where to go and how to get help in some local crisis lines. There's a lot of information out there, and most people don't know about them till they need them.
And that's good. That's why we're doing this forum tonight, so that we can educate people on the different places that they can go and that they can get help. All of you have talked so wonderfully tonight. And I know that, like I said, there's more than one person on this panel who has had someone, die by suicide. What would you say to, I do have a friend whose son lost a friend that died by suicide. And then the person left behind is now struggling. What would you say? The child has been taken to counseling, but the child is yet struggling. How would you help that parent as she's trying to help her child? What would you say to the parent to encourage her to continue to try to make it through all of this?
For myself, I think there's something called, there's a website, Dougie, the Dougie.org, DOUGY. It guides parents, and there's also one, mymichaelsplace.net. It's plural, mymichaelsplace.net. And we also have a place called Children's Grief Center, the Children's Grief Center here in the Great Lakes Bay Area. And they help teens after any type of death. They help the families, they have the parents and the children and the kids. They meet, I'm sure virtual now, but they will be meeting in person, and they help the families guide these kids through their grief. We can't dismiss kids. What I don't like is people say, oh, kids are resilient, and they kind of pat them on the back. It impacts them, and then they say they'll have trauma. If we don't listen to them and validate the pain that they're experiencing, it'll then turn into their trauma. So both of those websites and the Great Lakes, the Children's Grief Center here, will guide parents on having that conversation. You might just ask the kids, what did you think when Joe took his life? What was your first thoughts? Have you ever had those thoughts yourself? And make it a conversation. Instead of telling them it's not your fault, don't talk about it, don't worry about it. We need to hear what those kids think. We need to hear what their friends think.
Absolutely. I agree with that, because if you don't listen to that child that's having all of that pain, that's experiencing that pain from the loss of another friend, then that child himself or herself ends in a crisis as well. So I like that. I like what you said. I love the different websites that you gave for parents to go to when their child is having that sort of crisis. Now, I really appreciate everybody that's on this panel tonight, because it's important that we get this information out. It's important that we tell people about mental health, that we make them aware of the different things, maybe the different signs. I've heard where they're withdrawing from the normal things that they do. They're no longer doing those things. They don't want to go in the different places that they used to go. Maybe they liked music, they stopped listening to it. They just stopped. They changed. They actually change, they're just not the same. So at that point is when we really need to really take a look and see what's really going on with that child. Am I right, Kevin? And he's muted.
Sorry, I had to find my mute button. No, you're absolutely right. As Barb said, most people just need to be heard. It does not always reach the clinical point But most people need to be heard. Most people need to know what resources are available to them in their community. I spend a lot of time with young people, high school, college age in particular. And one of the disconnects we have as parents or providers is we always think what we're providing is resonating with them, and it's not. And so one of the things that I always ask is, what are we missing? What are the gaps? Tell me what you need. Tell me if assist training is not resonating with you, what is? So we really need to hear people, not just young people, all people, but we really need to listen so we hear what people are telling us about their pain, not just listening to respond as we typically do.
There was a question that came across, and the question was, how does the court deal with this? And I'm going to ask you, Judge Terry Clark, do you have any idea? And if not, I'll go back to Barbara and Kevin.
Well, in our area, Vicki, one of the things that we do, fortunately enough for us, if you can hear me, hopefully everybody can hear me. Now through our jail system, we have embedded mental health workers over at the county jail to help us when we see individuals who come through the court system. If they have a behavioral crisis that they're going through, we have someone that we can funnel them through there in our local county jail. We have great team of people through CMHS, and they have their local provider there in the jail. So that's one avenue for us. And that's how we try to deal with it and reaching out. And even us as judges, when we see someone who's dealing with a mental health crisis, we always try to find some resources for that person. We try to take that step because a lot of us take the position, jail is not a place for somebody dealing with a behavioral health crisis. That's not the place for them to be. And that's how we try to go that extra mile to look out for that population.
Okay, that's good. That's really good.
Well,
Were you
Vicki,
getting ready to say something?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, like, for our network, we offer the trainings, but we also help families after someone has been impacted by suicide. We have an ongoing support group. We also have a loss team where 2 people will go and connect with the families who had the loss. So we will sit with them in the early hours and days of the suicide to be a support. We also are the network. That's why it's the Resource and Response Network, because we want to connect you to resources. We are not a crisis line, but there are so many resources in Saginaw County. People can call 211. Judge, that's another way. 211 is a nonprofit, pretty much, for those of my age and era, it's like the Yellow Pages, right? You can just call 211 and they will tell you about all the local resources that we have. We should not be punishing people. The jails should not be full of people struggling with mental health. They should not be punished. They shouldn't, and they don't all need to be inpatient. We just have to be better care, as Kevin said. Let's get them before they're at a stage 4. Let's work together to get people early on.
Yeah, if I could add, again, behavioral health care and the resources available have evolved. We have specialty courts now. We have mental health courts. We have jail diversion. I wear a lot of hats. I happen to also sit on the governor's mental health diversion council. And so we're trying to make sure we don't criminalize mental illness. Unfortunately, many people may know Michigan's largest mental health treatment facility is the Wayne County Jail. And that is common across the state. That's not a Michigan ill. If you go to Ohio, it's the Cuyahoga County Jail. If you go to California, it's the Los Angeles County Jail, and so on and so on. People shouldn't go to jail, or their mental illness should not be criminalized. We need to be proactive and help people before they intersect with law enforcement and the judicial system. So there are many more tools available than most are aware of. And part of my responsibility as an advocate, and I think it frankly falls on the shoulders of all of us, is to better educate the public about the resources that are available. Everything from training to resources. Michigan has a wonderful now certified community behavioral health care centers, a federally funded program that Senator Debbie Stabenow championed for us. Across the state of Michigan, there are 24 of these high quality behavioral health care centers that will provide behavioral health care to anyone, regardless of the severity of their diagnosis, regardless of their insurance status, and regardless of their ability to pay. They are federally funded to take all comers. So while I can make the argument we don't have enough resources, there are a lot of resources that are underutilized simply because we're not aware of them.
And Vicki, also here in Saginaw County, we do have a mental health court. We do have that here in Saginaw County. We are one of those counties that does have a mental health court.
Perfect. That's great. That's very good to know. I'm glad that we do have that mental health court right here in the Saginaw County. Well, I've enjoyed my conversation with each one of you. I don't know if anybody else on the panel has any questions that you might want to ask before we end tonight. This has been a great panel. I've enjoyed everybody's story. There are a lot of personal stories on this site tonight, on this panel tonight. Everybody has a personal story. And when you talk about things like this, when you talk about mental illness and suicide, it can be very emotional because it's bringing back a lot of the emotions when you think about it. And just like you said, Kevin, when every time you speak about this, you're telling your son's story, it's going to always bring back emotions. But, I applaud you because you also admitted that you couldn't handle it. And you were in your own mental crisis after he died by suicide, and you sought that help, and you came up out of it. Grieving is a process, so it doesn't stop when a person is buried. This is a process. It's a process that you have to go through. Sometimes it takes a lot longer than what people might expect it to take, but everybody's a little bit different in the way that they grieve. So it is a process. So we have to make it through that process. And I applaud you. I applaud Matisa because you're going out and you're talking all over and you're telling the story about your wonderful daughter and how great she was. This was your child. This is your child. And you lost your child by suicide. But yet you're carrying on and you're letting people know about what was going on with her and the things that you were dealing with and the things that she was dealing with. And you did all that you could. And you, Barb, you lost your brother. And here you are, you've opened this wonderful organization. You also have a Walk for Hope. Tell us about that Walk for Hope before we end tonight.
Oh, yeah, Vicki, thank you for that. Sunday, August 8th at SVSU, Saginaw Valley State University, we will have our Walk for Hope. This is a 5K or 3 mile. It's a walk to run. It's to raise money and awareness to help us continue to be here for service in the Great Lakes Bay region. But it's really a day of hope. And I hate to say it's fun, but we have guest speakers. One of them might be Kevin this year. But we do have guest speakers. We have a band. We have, I don't want to say it's fun, but it is fun. It's lighthearted. It's a lot of people coming together. Pre-COVID, we had about 1,500 people. And it's right at SVSU. So if you're a survivor of suicide loss, if you want to support this cause, if you want to just support the message that there is hope, please join us. It's Sunday, August 8th. The Jolt. Jolt is actually one of our title sponsors, and TV5, WNEU TV5. So we hope that you join us. And it really is a great day to bring people together to make a difference.
It is. And once again, Barb, if you would give us your website so they can reference it on your website as well.
Yeah. SRN.net.
I'd like to make one comment, Vicki.
Sure.
I think that everything that we've heard about the resources has been great, and I've taken notes myself because some of the resources I was not familiar with. But I really would like to emphasize the role of family and also the role of our churches in suicide prevention and mental health prevention or stabilizing mental health. Because one of the things that the research is showing is that the churches still have a valuable role to play in suicide prevention. And that young people, especially since this is the group that is more impacted by suicide now, young people that have a connection with a church and have some beliefs in church are less likely to commit suicide or to die by suicide. So the church still has a valuable role to play in establishing, number one, purpose, young people that have a purpose in life, young people that have value, think of their life as having some value, and young people that have love, feel that there is some love, that somebody loves them, are less likely to commit suicide. And those are factors that families, organizations, and churches can be very involved in making sure that these things are getting through to our young people, that and that we can help them with purpose, with value, and with love.
Absolutely. And Pastor Coleman, do you have anything you'd like to say about what Georgia just mentioned?
Absolutely. I was going to add that I thank you, Dr. Connie, for bringing that in. It's one of those, one of those legs on the stool that will help to keep a balance and to have faith and to use your faith, but also to understand that just as people who go to church need a doctor if they have a physical illness, people who go to church will also need a doctor if there is a mental illness. And there needs to be an understanding of that. We as church leaders, as faith leaders, need to be comfortable helping people to find alternatives. We all want to pray, and I pray for so many people. We talk to people, we read the Bible, but there are other things. One of the strongest books in the whole Bible was written by a doctor. Luke was written by a doctor. He was included in the whole understanding. So this conversation, and I was thinking about it while you all were talking. I was thinking about my prayer, what I had asked God, that He would give me the opportunity to speak to things that people were thinking about and not able to say. And somehow you all were so transparent and open about it that there are people who are touched by the conversation tonight. And I'm sure we'll be
Absolutely.
looking for ways out. And so I'm thankful, and I believe that you have done a great ministry. So now we, the faith community, can tag in with the medical community and the scientific community. I appreciate Judge Clark for having that court side to look at how to deal with it. So this was just powerful, Vicki. This was powerful, women of color. This was powerful, and I hope that it's just the beginning of conversations like this.
Absolutely.
And if I
Yes.
could
And
just
I
jump in
already
for a
had
minute.
somebody. Yeah, go ahead, Lula.
Yeah, and if I could jump in as we, as a person of faith as well, you know, the churches now, a lot of the churches are getting involved in this program called Grief Share, and
Absolutely.
it's quite huge, and you don't have to belong to a specific church in order to be a part of this group. And it is phenomenal. I put my stamp of approval on it because we're doing it through our church. And I have a testimony that can be shared with a person on this feed as well that has been participating in that group. And so it is just phenomenal. It is called Grief Share. And like I said, a lot of the churches have bought into that. So just
Absolutely, Lula. It is a wonderful program. As Lula said, I actually put myself and my daughter through Grief Share program through our church, which is Victorious Believers Ministries. And I will be one of the facilitators coming up in the next round of Grief Share, which takes place coming up in June. So it's a 13-week program, and I'm excited about it because I learned a lot. We helped each other. You don't have to belong to that church, Victorious Believers, in order to be a part of Grief Share. It's done by Zoom. If you don't want to talk, you don't have to. You can listen, you can cry to each other, whatever you're feeling. But it is a wonderful program, and we help get people through what they're going through. I've enjoyed our conversations tonight, and I wouldn't dare end without having our president, which is Evelyn McGovern, as she would say some final words.
Hello,
And before she
everyone. I
comes
just
on,
want
thank you so much to all of our panelists. You did an amazing job. I appreciate you. Somebody has already asked for part 2, and we will try to get that going. All right. So thank you so much. I appreciate you. Evelyn.
I just want to take a moment to thank all of our panelists. It was so good, very educational. I learned a lot, and I hope we saved some lives today. I lost a nephew a couple months ago. He was only 31 years old, and I know we all know someone that has lost someone, a loved one, a family member, a friend. And you can see people that are looking good, going to work, look good, go to church, looking great, but they're hurting inside. They're hurting inside. And so I just want to give a special thanks to everybody that tuned in this evening, to our committee, to our community forum committee. I just thank everyone. Vicki, you do an awesome job always, always. Alpha Media, thank you for hosting this for us. And Mid-State Health Network is our sponsor. I have to thank them as well. So we're doing what we can. Women of Colors is doing what we can, and we can't do it without the community support.
I always say that Women of Colors is loving our community from the inside out. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in tonight. We will try our best to do a part 2. So stay tuned. You know, I'm going to give you the information and let you know when that will take place. All right. So thank you so much to everyone that took a part in this conversation tonight. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.